Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for joining us for another episode of All the Angles, the business of Padel podcast worldwide, powered by the Hexagon Cup. This week, our focus is on women's padel. I'm joined this episode by three individuals who have a huge amount of experience in this area. We have Pepita Stonor, who is currently the founder of Empower Padel. She led the UK arm of Fem Open for 2 years and now launched this new project, which is about promoting equality, well-being and inclusion through padel, based mainly out of the UK. We've also got Nicola Beumer, who is a Dutch squash player and coach, but also a padel coach and player as well. She's the founder of Team Power and also the founder of Expat Padel Club Amsterdam. And finally, we have Belen Montes, who is in charge of marketing, growth and expansion at Padel Nuestro, which is a leading sales outlet for padel apparel and equipment. So let's get started. But before we do, if you enjoy this episode or have benefited from previous ones, please like, share, subscribe. It helps. So thank you very much for joining. We're not going to focus on professional women's padel. I think that will be a different episode. I really want to focus much more on participation. So I think the two parts of the journey that I'm looking for is how do we get women into padel, trying padel, curious about padel? That's kind of the first phase. And then afterwards, we can focus a bit more about keeping women in padel once they've tried it, once they've sampled it. How do we make sure that they keep playing and keep enjoying it and perhaps even become advocates for the sport to their friends, their children, their families? So let's begin with an assumption. And hopefully it's a safe assumption, but I would love for you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that the way we promote and position padel to women is different from the way we do it to men. Would that be a safe assumption? Nicole, do you want to start?
That's, for one, I think that women's padel is a totally different game. So I think you see in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands that the game is played. If you go into the clubs, it's mostly male players. A lot of so I mean, maybe it scares off a bit the women. I think you need a different approach to get the board. It would have more female coaches in the club. Like, I don't know in the Netherlands how they position it. They are now busy positioning the women by organizing events, matches, but mainly popular in the Netherlands. They're starting now being really busy promoting all sorts of different events. What I do with the expats, I have actually a big of females. With my club, it's like 50% men and women. It's because like this community, because there are expats international, community of expats international. That's what's bring them together, and this brings in the women, not like how you would see it in all the other clubs. There, it's still mostly, I would say, 80 playing. So I don't think yet they have a real straight line on how they promote the women's game. They are trying all kinds of different entities that are organizing women's, but in all different events. So it's still in the.
And Pep, from your experience, primarily in the UK sector, do you find with your project you're trying to identify, I guess, exactly the nuances and the packaging in which you provide or position padel? What's your experience with how padel is promoted generally and whether enough attention is paid to how the women's audience is segmented and identified and marketed to?
Look, I think in the UK, we are tiny, it's nascent. We're really at the very beginning of the journey. And when I first started in padel, there were no women at all. I had to partner men for competitions. I couldn't find women to partner with. Things would get cancelled. So I think we have to appreciate that the UK has actually come quite a long way since 2020, 2021. And there's a lot more focus now. But I would say there's a lot more work to be done so that everybody working at the sport looks at everything they do with a gender focused lens, not just participation, but leadership and performance areas. There's a lot of work to be done. But I think when you ask the question, what do we do? Actually, I think a lot comes way before people have even entered the paddle arena. You know, the sort of gender bias and unconscious bias starts at a very young age. So I think we can't change the world. And what we tend to say with our women coming to us is that there are sort of 6 stages of behavior change. And the very first stage is just realizing the possibilities of being able to either go back to sport or start sport for the first time. And I think for clubs listening to this, really trying to take on board that every single woman will be in a different stage of their life journey, and that you have to understand their motivations before you can put things in place. So you will have women that are already playing a lot of tennis or squash. They're early adopters. They will be easy to get on board and into paddle. But when you look at the women that have disengaged from sport at high school, and we know the stats are huge, and then you look at women that have never played sport, and we have those. And for me, being Australian, I always find that quite, eye-opening that somebody has never played sport before. But this is where paddle is so amazing at getting women active and healthy and engaged with friends. It's such a fun social sport. So I think once we understand that whole package, it's not just as easy as putting a woman's program on, because you have to take a step back and think, where is this woman in their journey? And then there are other stages of behavior change to actually, and I think you're going to come on to that in the second part of the podcast. So just getting them to realize there are possibilities. There are some basic things you need, like courts near them for a start. So the UK to date, there are still counties that don't have a paddle court. So you've got to have that basic infrastructure in place. But then there is the second stage, which is more about togetherness. And that is something that people need to understand, that sense of belonging. And there will usually be a trigger that gets a woman onto court. And it's a bit like, you're much more likely to go to the gym if you commit the night before to a friend. It's very like that in paddle. And we've just done a survey, and 47% of our community said they were introduced to paddle by a friend, a female friend, and 58% said they play with a female friend. So you can see that the friendship piece is super important to women, to just getting them in. And then there are other stages to the behavior change to make sure that they stay in the sport. But I think just getting them into the sport, it's quite simple, really. It's about a friendship thing, and it's about having friends to play with. It's fun, it's social. We all know that. We all love paddle. So it's not really too difficult if we can get the friends on board.
I guess there's also the stereotype that men are drawn to the concept of competition and betterment and sweat and power. As Nicole mentioned, there's slightly more macho-esque kind of drivers. With women, you mentioned obviously, Pep, the social piece and the community piece. I think, Nicole, you're obviously talking about the community piece as well, as you talk about your expat community. What other kind of levers are in play, and to what extent do they play? For example, you have health and fitness is an important driver. Also, some women are very competitive and want to improve. Some are much more focused about lifestyle, especially in different communities and in different markets. Maybe Belen, as someone who's in the more commercial sphere, you've got a lot of background, over a decade in the commercial sphere.
I was listening to them, and my photos much different because, in Spain, the paddle is bigger. But in Spain, women's paddle has become a huge success, and we promote it through various strategic. We have 100 of teams and competition that encourage participation. Yeah. So additionally, we create a fun atmosphere with social events only for women, all for women, where people can enjoy, drink, of course, little beers and socialize after match. This not only fosters community, but also attract more women to the sport. We focus on the enjoyment to make some friends, and the paddle brings making it an appealing option for new player, and it can help you in strategic. Most of the team that are women's teams are women's after 50 or 60 years, which are retired. And for clubs, it's a very good strategy because they play during the morning and during the time that the courts are not busy, So I think this gonna be in your countries in the next couple of years. But in Spain, really, women's padel has become huge success.
And you touched upon this idea of women's only platforms, whether it's competitions, whether it's courts, whether it's social events. How prevalent is the need for these kind of safe or single sex environments? Is it really crucial, or is it only as a feeder piece? Because when I had the conversation in the Middle East episode, the Saudi Arabian speaker, Najwa, talked about how it was critical to have these private courts for women to enjoy privacy and they would feel more comfortable with that opportunity. Whereas Anwar from Dubai said that they started with that, but they actually found that that worked for coaching, but it actually didn't work so well for participation and play. And they actually found that even when they set aside those courts, the women preferred to play in mixed environments. So is there a danger of overstating the need for safe single-sex platforms, or do you think that that is critical at a certain point in the journey? Pep, maybe you want to jump in on your thoughts on that.
We're obviously at a very early stage, so we've got women that are learning the sport, and I think at that stage, a female friend bringing them in is great. But regardless, in any situation, it's the same as a workplace. They need to feel included, valued, respected. There needs to be some amount of sort of psychological well-being in a club. And the men are just as important in that, obviously. So if women then feel comfortable playing mixed, then that's no problem. But I think there's a gap in skill progression. So interestingly, again, in our survey, yes, even though the women said they wanted to come on board with their female friends, pretty much all of them, their goal was to get better, to compete, to learn. So we shouldn't dumb that down at all, because women should be fearless and women should be able to compete. But that's why at the beginning of this, I said we're fighting against gender inequity that starts from age 5. But women, they can compete and they do want to, but they need the skill progression and they need the help to learn paddle properly, which comes on to the lack of coaches. And I think if you put women straight into a mixed environment without the skills, they may well feel like a rabbit in headlights as the ball's being thrashed around them. But then if they've got the skills and they feel I love a game of ball. So I've got lots of mixed setups that we play. So to bring sustained change and to get women into the game properly, you definitely need to focus on that, some sort of coaching program, skill improvement, I think is important, which probably in the UK, we need more coaches.
Nicole, in your community where the primary objective is about bedding in expats, right? So that's the thing that brings everyone together. Yeah. Does having that kind of umbrella focus or umbrella objective mean that in your community there is much more willingness to engage in mixed sport from the beginning? Or do you find actually even within your expat community, there is still an appetite for the women to play in their own kind of courts or their own matches initially, or does it make a change, or it's still mixed bag?
It's an interesting question, but for now it's just mixed. They are all beginners, intermediate, low intermediate levels, and they like to mingle female men, so it works really well. But I can see that now that we are improving a little bit our levels, they are now also putting up only girls matches. So this is the first time I've actually came across that last week, that they're actually posting some girls matches as well, which I think is great because the girls, they just have a different game, less powerful. They feel maybe when they're really beginners more fun, that they feel free and that they're not being hammered by the boys. And I think another thing what helps very much is for the women to have also female coaches at the club, so that when they take a lesson that they actually feel that they are being coached by a woman, and it could be like a role model for them. And I think in the end, everything comes down also, like the women is like, we are the heartbeat of the community, keeping the people together and encouraging them. And it's interesting because I did ask the Dutch Federation, because Amsterdam is different than throughout the Netherlands with Padel. And I wanted to see what the women's stats are in the Netherlands. And my percentage of women is way higher because in my club it's 50-50, and throughout the Netherlands it would be like maybe 40-60, or in Amsterdam even 20-80%. But yeah, I saw that they were planning actually games within the group, within the expert group, that they were actually asking for only a women game. So this was the first time. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And even myself, that I'm playing at a higher level, I only play with the guys. But when we get a game, and a good game, let's say, then it is actually for me also very nice to be challenged and to play with only women because the game is different.
And what about kind of getting school girls or young women involved in paddle? Is there a magic formula, a magic message that makes it enticing to them? I know there's no silver bullet. None of us are a monolith, but is there any experiences, maybe Belen, that you've come across where an initiative or a marketing message or a tactic has really helped with regards to getting schoolgirls into the sport or teenage girls into the sport?
Yeah, I really think you should involve the government in promoting women's paddle. As an example, my little girl, she has year and a half, and now she's in the kindergarten. And next year, she have in the kindergarten paddle. We have the option. Yeah, it's funny. She can hold the racket, but she's gonna be a player. So for us, government is really involved in the sport, and also, for example, in my neighbor, I have a court. So I am a teacher, and what Nicola say, I am as a coach, and I focus on especially in kids and women's. And I think it's really important the different how you teach to a woman and how you teach to a man. If a man smash, no, it's not the same as a woman. So I'm not teach a woman to be strong and come back to your court. We teach them a little bandejas, slow to defense. There are a lot of different strategies to teach to a woman, to a man. So I really enjoy teaching paddle to women because I think we are smarter, but not stronger, but we are smarter. So going back to your question, I think it's very important that the government start to be involved in our sport and build a lot of courts. We have a lot of courts in Spain and also in Argentina from the government, which are cheaper, and there are a lot of public places. So I think this is really, really important. And the public school, this is very easy sport for everyone. So all the kids can start to play paddle in the school.
My daughter is 5 years old, and she initially got interested in paddle because the coach is a good-looking young Spanish man, and she quite deliberately told me that that's why she wanted to have lessons. She wanted to spend time with him, but now we're about...
What did you say back, Alex? We'll have an off-camera conversation, what you said back.
I just wanted to get her on court. But now that she's had 4 or 5 lessons, she's watched Amy Gibson, who's the #1 British player who trains at our club. She's been watching her play, and Amy's been practicing a lot in mixed matches. And it gives my daughter a lot of satisfaction to see Amy compete and win points against the men. So that now seems to be the driver. And I actually said to her, because she's got her lesson today, whether she would prefer to have Amy coach her or Pau coach her, the young Spanish guy, and she was Amy. So it's interesting that even within a short space of time, the motivation is different, and now the competitive, successful, victorious female is becoming almost a role model to her, much more than the good-looking young male. So I'm trying to understand, because Pepita, you also mentioned the drop-off that also comes. I mean, it happens with men as well. At an age, hormones kick in and priorities change, and suddenly you get a massive drop-off of participation, let alone competition in sports. Is there a way of maximizing or maintaining those numbers to stay in those sports rather than letting them disappear and hoping they come back somewhere in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, whoever it may be?
Oh, look, again, there's a massive piece here about girls dropping out, and my daughter's 14, so I'm living it. 49% of girls play team sports in the UK versus 70% of boys. So in sport in general, you've got an issue, which paddle can't address everything, but paddle has such an amazing ability to keep girls included or children included, because you don't have to have as many technical aspects as you need for perhaps tennis or golf. And if you haven't had coaching of tennis or golf, you can get into paddle quite quickly, which is the beauty of the sport for adults as well. But for girls, it's tricky, right? There's a lot of problems. We've actually just started a program for girls. We had 72 girls on court yesterday from the local state school from a fundraising program just we did. And I think sometimes it's just making people a little bit aware that perhaps, and this comes back to the equity piece, that perhaps as an industry, we need to look at our budgets, what percentage of budgets are devoted to these things for girls and women's participation, leadership and performance. I know we're not going to do that today, but you have to have those active role models at the other end too. So for your daughter to see Amy Gibson, it's super important. I think the Aussies have done a lot of research on this. If you see it, you can believe it, and you can look at other sports and see. You've got the women's football team. How many little girls' dreams they think, I can do that, I can see that. And that's important, which is why you do need a lot of money invested at the other end, the top elite end, because you've got to have our daughters aspiring to be able to do that. So those players are pretty important, but they're pretty few and far between. Female coaches are few and far between. And I think that having a gender lens at a club level, I'm like Nicola, my club is 60% women, but that's because, I'm generating a lot of sort of women belonging, sense of feeling valued, respected. And I'm not saying all clubs don't have that. I just think that perhaps sometimes clubs are so busy in their let's get set up, all the sort of infrastructure issues that come about setting up a club, they may not think actively, how do we really get women to be part of this community? Because again, in our survey, if you look, 47% of women were introduced to paddle by a friend, 58% play with a female. But when they're asked if their club has female-focused activities, 41% said no, or they don't know. So there's definitely a disconnect there in terms of just focusing on the women and girls, because that's non-existent in the UK.
So is the answer really about, because we're obviously now starting to talk about continued engagement in the sport after that curiosity, after that first sampling of the sport? Because it sounds to me actually like we need to go one step beyond, women prefer this, men prefer that. Because as you mentioned right at the beginning, the segmentation of women, whether it's based on personalities, whether it's based on where they are in their life journey, that changes. And some are competitive and ferocious competitors and want to win, and some are interested in the lifestyle. Does the requirement for segmentation only start as women get more engaged in the sport, or actually it starts from the very beginning, that understanding that it's not just about offering a female solution, it's about offering multiple types of female solutions to get different types of females in through the door and staying through the door?
Yeah, it depends what their motivation is for taking up the sport. And I think every woman will be different. So it might be fitness, it might be to meet friends, it might be to compete. There's just so many different motivations and different trigger points and different support networks that will be needed before that woman even walks through a paddle club's door. And maybe she comes for the first time, but it's how you get them back that is really key for the future of the game in the UK. And it's wonderful to hear that Spain has such a fantastic social element. And I suppose I'd just maybe like to ask Belen if it was always like that, because that's quite interesting.
Of course not.
No.
Padel has been in Spain for many, many years. Same as I'm from Argentina, same as Argentina, but we all have a beginning like you. So just to be patient and just little by little, step by step, and you will make it for sure. The growing, and especially in UK, we have a lot of investment there. We're gonna make a shop there now. Our company is really looking in the UK because the paddle grows there a lot. We talk a lot with a lot of paddle court construction, and UK and are the really focused.
And so I think it's a good time to talk about coaches, and all of you have mentioned coaches at some point in this conversation already. I guess I'm trying to distinguish between whether it's important to have female coaches or whether it's important to have all coaches have modules or aspects in their qualification syllabus that talks about understanding how coaching women is different from coaching men. Because I think they're not mutually exclusive, but they may solve different problems. Belen, you mentioned that when you coach women, you're playing a different sport in many ways. So what do you think is the priority,
Yeah,
having women coaches or having coaches that understand how to coach
no,
women?
I mean, in this point, my coach is a man, so I think there are a lot of good coaches, men for women. I think women could be nice, but it is not necessary to focus only in women's culture, but it is important to have empathy for women play. So we should understand their need and support them, and we are not stronger and we don't learn as quick at them normally. So I think the point here should be a highlight to say that could be a man, could be a woman, but empathy for how women play.
So it's not just about technique, it's also about mental and psychology and things like that. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I agree with Belen. It's like getting any good coach in life. It comes down to the individual who they feel is going to get the most out of their playing ability. So you're talking about trying to get that player to the best of their ability. But I think empathy is the absolutely key point. So understanding that it might be a big deal to come back to sport age 50 or try sport for the first time. So she may need a little bit more nurture and a little bit longer to feel confident, because I think confidence is a huge issue with the women I see. And, all of them that enter our tournaments, I can't tell you the number of times they tell me they're not good enough, or will I be able to compete? The insecurities are just ridiculous. And you only have to see that with levelings as well. Men, sorry, Alex, but tend to overestimate their paddle abilities, whereas women always underestimate. They'll tell you they're a beginner when they're not, whereas men will tell you they're playing for their country. Sorry, Alex. Not all men. But
100%. I put myself forward for a Fit Prize qualifier last year. I'm an idiot. So
you'll just move on. A woman would never do that. In the workplace too, there's lots of research all around this. Women always undersell what they're inherently capable of, which is why it was so reassuring to see so many women fill out our survey to say that their goals in paddle were to compete. So it's there. It's just the job of the coach to bring it out, to say you are completely capable, be fearless and go for it. Maybe they feel more comfortable in a female environment to start, but it doesn't take them long to then move on to mixed or LTA competitions. It really doesn't. We've probably sent hundreds of women to those competitions once they've done one or two of ours and they feel comfortable. But it's really about empathy. I agree with Belen.
And Nicole, what's your experience? You've been a squash coach for a long time, a paddle coach more recently. In the trenches, so to speak, how have you found being a female coach with women, being a female coach with men? How have you approached it differently? What are the success skills and the tactics that you employ to really get women onto the court and stay on the court?
Well, there is, of course, a little difference between coaching men and women. I have experienced it. A lot of people that come to my classes are mostly mixed. So I have the men and the women. I can see from the men when they don't know me and they come to the class and they see a female there, I can sort of feel they might think, oh, that's a woman, it's a different kind of lesson. They're used to the men, to the power. But of course, I have the confidence because I've been coaching all my life. I've been developing in paddle in the last 5 years now. And I have the confidence that I can take everything from my squash career in the sense of how you train, not only the technique, but the tactics and also the mindset. So then we go to the class and actually feel that after the hour, they are appreciative and found there was a lot of value in the session. I'm sure it has to do with all the background I have from my squash career. Now for the women, and this is also from my experience, I mean, as a coach, I think besides that you have to know everything about the sport or the tactics or the technique, you need to know a little bit about the mentality or the psychology of the players that are in front of you. And those are different men and women. So I think it's very important to be always positive with the women, to encourage them, to have appraisal for what they're doing. And actually, the most fun for me as well is to see them getting more confident during the session, having more fun, believing in themselves, that they free up and actually are improving. And I think it's a lot to do with the coach who is there, that is, making them feel comfortable on court and believing in them. and then just by playing and hitting some balls, they're getting more confident, and then they want to come back for more. So there is, of course, a little difference.
Belen, you mentioned the role models as well, I think, as an important piece. And we're not going to go into the professional women's circuit in too much detail, but how important is it in terms of growing interest in women and maintaining interest in women to see role models? And role models can be coaches, role models can be top players in the club, role models can be professionals. How important has it been in Spain to see the top Spanish women ascending to the top? How important is it from a corporate point of view when you look at the companies that are the equipment company? You worked at Beumer for a while, and now at Padel Nuestro. How important is it for the commercial side of the business in terms of selling equipment and apparel to have these female heroes and advocates for the sport? The likes of Bea or Delphi or Ari or whoever it may be. Those are the top heroes, right? But then you've also got the coaches are heroes. Definitely it is for my daughter at the moment. I'm sure it's the same in every country. If you see a woman playing tremendously well on court, holding her own, giving the boys trouble, or just playing a fantastic women's match, but where the level is incredibly high and fast and furious and tactical. Do you feel like that is something that is neglected by clubs and courts in Spain or in other countries, or it's something that they should invest a little bit more time and energy and thought into having those people visible?
Yeah, I really think my photo is very different, like Holland, UK, and different countries. But here, I mean, I play with men without problem. We play mix, and here is very, very diversity. I mean, doesn't matter if you're a woman and men. The important thing is your level, and that's it. So here we have a lot of tournament for women, for men, and we are no separate women's or men now. I mean, I don't know exactly the data, the numbers, but we are almost half and a half. For us, we know the sales, and we sell much more for women's than for men's, So in other countries, we sell just for men's. Like I manage Italy, and I have the key account in Italy, and we sell most for men. But in Spain, women's plays a lot and plays good, and all of them love to play, and the men's like to play with women. Here, there's no different.
So I want to take a step back to say maybe a bit of an incendiary question, but I want to make it very clear to the audience. What's the benefit of courting women players for clubs? I think there is a feeling at some places that it's just a headache. It's an over-segmentation. Do we really need to spend this much time on thinking about this solutions? I think we've talked about what can be done, but I want to just spend a minute on what are the benefits for a club? What are the benefits for the sport generally to really invest that extra time, creativity, energy, solutions into trying to court the women's players? Pep, maybe you want to touch on that.
Well, I think in any situation, diversity is good, right? You should have lots of diversity in a business. And there's not just women, right? We've got sorts of other diverse areas that we don't even touch on in the UK. But with women, my gut feeling is that I think we said it a little bit before, but women will bring their friends to a club. So that's great for a start. They'll probably be more likely to bring the children and the family.
Yeah,
they're likely to stay in the club for a long time and have a coffee. I mean, I'm not saying men don't do that, but in general, women, they buy, right? Every time I turn up to a tournament in an outfit, 5 women ask me where it's from. And there's nothing in the UK about padel. I've got 2 brands that are tennis brands that have completely come across to support our tournaments because it's a whole new market segment for them, right? Tennis is saturated. In the UK, no one knows. It's so new. It's such a ripe market for business. I don't know why most people don't target women for the whole clothing, merch, everything. It's still pretty male dominant, I would say, in the UK. Even basics like racket fittings. I don't know why more people don't do that. In fact, we have actually got one provider that is going to do one for us, but where you come and you explain, if you're coming into the sport, what do all these racket shapes mean? What do you need if you're a beginner and you're new into it? What do you need to then aim for as your skills progress? Because I can tell you, nobody really does that very well. I've heard all sorts of explanations between the difference of all the racket shapes. But, somebody really sort of, explaining it to women, great, they buy, they love it.
And Belen, from your point of view, from a commercial side, I'm assuming again that you touched on it already, that the women's spend is a significant part of any paddle business, and it shouldn't be neglected and is definitely worth focusing on.
Yes, I mean, well, I used to work for a brand, and we work next to the Sioux, the brand, and they, like in all the business plan, marketing plan, and stuff, they really focus in the woman, like a woman collection with women, racket, women, t-shirt, marketing campaign for women. So women is very important for the business.
And I wanted to touch upon the attitude of clubs, right? So we've talked a lot about the requirement to build these platforms, initiatives, spaces, activities that can really address the appetite, the interest, the curiosity of women. For clubs, that requires a bit of thinking, a bit of planning, a bit of rejigging. So maybe, Nicole, we can start with you. Like, what have you found the attitude of clubs to be? Are they resistant? Are they initially interested? Are they continuously interested? I guess my theory is that they don't like it, then they like it because they think it might address an occupancy issue, and then they think maybe we should own this ourselves rather than let some outsider kind of run this piece of our puzzle and have this visibility and data and connection. But I'm speculating. How do you find the courts and the clubs respond to these female first or female focused initiatives and spaces?
Well, what I've seen now in Amsterdam, which is different than the rest of the Netherlands, as we are commercial clubs, padel clubs throughout the Netherlands are mostly combined with the tennis clubs, so they get all this transfer from tennis to padel. I would say that what I see in Amsterdam now, actually lately in the last year, I see more women, more than before. It was in the beginning, I could say it was 90% men playing and 10% women. I see more women matches. I see lots of initiatives in Amsterdam, but also I know from the Dutch Federation, because I spoke to them, they have put up many different initiatives to attract women to play. Women tournaments. I mean, there are loads of them. So in the beginning, for the clubs, the commercial clubs, they just need the occupancy of the courts. So they were not really busy with it. This was just trying to fill up the courts. So now that the courts are full, there is not a lot of extra space. But they do organize some women initiatives, like one of the big clubs now has like competition for the women. So they also have like professional women's team, so to attract more women. They start to come up with WhatsApp groups for women matches only. I think in general, they are open to it. I think they would like to attract more women to the clubs. Actually, because of the game of padel is so easy actually to play, and no matter, you don't need to be a sports person to have fun on the paddle court. So I think this by itself, that the paddle sport attracts women more easily than any other sport. So in time, and this is what Belen said as well, that in Spain they are 10 years ahead. They have loads and loads of women. And she said something like, it will come in Europe. And I actually think, I believe in that too, because I can see it happening here already. More and more women are playing. It's not now that I come to the club and I only see guys. I do see many more women playing. So I think the game as well attracts the women just by itself. Once they play, I think they'll enjoy it and they will come back for more. But of course, all the initiatives, they help. And also female coaches, I think, would help as well.
So that about wraps up our episode. Again, please like, share, and subscribe if the content was thought-provoking. Please comment on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any recommendations around formats, topics, questions, speakers we need to bring on. We want you all, those driving the next phase of this industry's future, to tell us what you want to hear about and who from. Thank you, Pep, Belen, and Nicole for joining us today. We will keep doing our best to cover all the angles of the business around padel, episode after episode. Till the next one, thank you.